Today, you are going to see possibly the most amazing mystery made in the material world. Total lunar eclipses occurring in meaningful patterns over the last 4 millennia. Has some power higher than mankind been using our skies for its signboard? Hi, I'm Stephen Corey.
And I am Charlene Corey.
Most likely nobody before the 21st century ever noticed these eclipse patterns because each one spans almost as many years as does the average adult life, and the eclipses making them were scattered around the world. No one had an attention span long enough to notice a pattern was forming, even if they were able to be wherever around the world the eclipses were observable. But in our days, NASA's lunar eclipse canon made seeing these eclipse patterns possible. So the first of them to be noticed began in the middle of the 20th century. It was discovered by Christian eschatologists. An eschatologist is someone who studies ancient literature and contemporary history for proposing ideas and predictions about the end times. They discovered that pattern only a few years before it ended in the early 21st century. Most of them thought it was making a significant prophecy about the Jewish Temple Mount. But after their proposed prophecy failed to happen, nobody ever said much more about it. And so, the many times that same pattern of eclipses had actually occurred down through history was never discovered until this 20th century pattern came to my attention. Its 12 total lunar eclipses were all consistently timed with one particular nation's two most important religious holy days, and their chronological arrangement encoded the dates of that nation's most important historical events. There were too many meaningful interrelationships between these eclipses and well-known history for it to strike me as being the product of chance alone. If it wasn't a chance occurrence, then it must have occurred by purposeful design.
That couldn't be right, could it? If the pattern was designed, why was it? And who designed it? Or what designed it? How could anyone determine whether it was made by purposeful design or by mere chance?
I thought that if this pattern was so important to design, then it must carry a message. And if that were so, I reasoned, there should have been more of these same patterns in the past also occurring at the time of significant historical events of that same particular nation. Messages are made of repetitive patterns. So if this pattern was deliberately designed, it probably was designed to be a message. As such, I reasoned, there should be more of the same pattern discernible in NASA's lunar eclipse canon. And if there were more of them correlating with this same nation's earlier key historical events, the possibility of all this being mere happenstance would fade from credibility, and purposeful design would become the only rational explanation. Moreover, if those correlating historical events involved that nation's ancient religion, the possibility of design would be rationally raised to a certainty. Only a power higher than this material existence could guide historical events to correlate with recurring lunar eclipse patterns. And if those events fulfilled earlier prophecies written into that nation's ancient religious books, especially if those fulfilled prophecies placed that nation central to some process of ridding the world of bad people at some end of evil's time, the conclusion of design for the purpose of delivering a message could not be avoided, no matter how silly it might sound. I intend to make you a video discussing all the historical events over which these 32 eclipse patterns occurred. That discussion will necessarily be rather lengthy, but to appreciate the full mystique of these signs made by these eclipse patterns in our present discussion, I will hurry through those events now. The first 1948-year pattern to appear in NASA's eclipse canon began in the second year that Joseph was Pharaoh's vizier. Joseph's entire family was invited into Egypt by this Pharaoh, and there they grew into the people who would become Israel. Joseph died during the second eclipse pattern, and before that pattern ended, the third pattern began, under which the Pharaoh who knew Joseph's family also died. The next Pharaoh turned hostile to the Israelites and enslaved them. Under the fourth pattern, Moses was born, who led them out of that slavery and on to the Jordan River. These first four signs of witness, as I call them in my book, intertwine through the 189 years from 1661 BC through 1472 BC. What I mean by intertwine is that before one pattern ended, the next pattern began. 7 times over the 4,400 years these 32 patterns occur, 24 of them intertwine. The fifth pattern is one of the 8 signs of witness that stand alone. It began 1433 BC, and under it Joshua led the Israelites into the land God promised to Abraham. There they became the nation of Israel, with God acting as their king through a priesthood. At least that is what their God intended. They did become that nation, but the God is their king thing didn't work out so well. Against God's rule, they clamored for a human king like the rest of the nations had. God gave them what they wanted. The next 5 signs of witness intertwined through the 247 years Israel was led off track by these human kings. Their nation soon broke apart. The northern kingdom became Israel, and the southern kingdom was Judah. This 250-year span of intertwining signs began 1028 BC and ended 781 BC. Under it occurred the great moral and religious failures of the Israelites to faithfully be what God chose them to be. Therefore, God flushed them both from the land he promised to their father Abraham. God returned Judah to their land after 70 years, but he did not return the Israelites of the north until 1948. 404 years after those signs ended, the 11th began. By its end, in 311 BC, Alexander the Great had spread the Macedonian kingdom throughout the Middle East, making Koine Greek the new international language. Israel's prophets, poets, and recorders of history had written the collection of Hebrew literature we now know as the Old Testament, mostly in Hebrew and some in Aramaic. But in many ways, Koine Greek was a more precise language, able to more accurately communicate the soon coming of the Israelites' Messiah, Jesus Christ, the message he would bring them, and the instructions his apostles would write for his church were not only enhanced by the increased precision of the Greek language, but, more importantly, Koine Greek became the linguistic highway for their spread throughout the Middle East. During the 12th sign of witness, 290 to 221 BC, the translation of the Old Testament into this new international language began. 386 years later, the 13th and 14th signs began intertwining from AD 162 through 246. Under them, the Romans made sport of Christian blood and death in their Colosseums. Then the Roman Emperor Constantine ended the Christian persecution as the 15th sign of witness stretched overhead from AD 267 through 333. During the 16th sign, the persecution of pagans began after Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Even as that sign began, some very tiny-minded Christians burned down the great library of Alexandria. Maybe God did not deem them fit for ruling, For under this sign the same emperor who decreed Christianity to be the official religion died, and the western half of the empire fell apart. But the eastern half continued as the Christian empire we called Byzantium until it was defeated in 1453. In the 8th century, Christian iconoclasm was erasing the face of Jesus from Byzantine art. The iconoclastic fanaticism ended during the century covered by the intertwining 17th and 18th signs. The relevance of this event wasn't the end of iconoclasm, nor was it necessarily that the face of Jesus was returning to Byzantine coinage. Its relevance was much more evidential than that. The model for Jesus' face on those coins was none other than Jesus' face on the Shroud of Turin, the burial cloth of Jesus. By the end of the 20th century, the Shroud of Turin had endured 700 years of scoffing, but by today, it has undergone every scientific test possible. Every test science has made of the shroud has affirmed its authenticity. Only the 1988 carbon-14 test could have been raised in objection to that statement had it not been completely botched, maybe deliberately botched. But botched tests are not scientific tests. Neither is relying on botched tests scientific thinking. More recent, more reliable dating methods place the shroud's origin in the 1st century AD, right there where it wrapped the lifeless body of Jesus for a couple nights. Under the 19th sign of witness, the Shroud of Turin was carried with great fanfare from its ancient home in Edessa to Byzantine Constantinople. Then, while the 20th sign winked and blinked through the 14th century, the Shroud of Turin entered our modern stage of history at the little church of Liry, France. Most folks imagine it was painted in that century rather than knowing its evidence and history's clues that the image of Jesus it displays is a photographic product of light, a natural-made photograph of Jesus Christ's resurrection. The complete testimony borne by the sign, which began in AD 1457, will need to await my video about these signs. There is too much to be said here. But as a teaser, notice that we are discussing this 21st sign here in the 21st century, the century of its discovery. Moreover, with this sign we step into a very special 7-century span of time, beginning with this sign of witness and ending with the last year of the 26th sign of witness. And notice from my book, Clear Signs of Trouble and Great Joy, what everyone should know about the Bible, history, and the future. And from my video, Gobekli Tepe and the Mazzaroth, Part 2, that these next 6 signs occur during the time spanned by the Sagittarius timeline found on archaeology's most mysterious pillar, Pillar 43, of mankind's most ancient stone temple, Gobekli Tepe, only 7 miles north of the Shroud of Turin's ancient home, Edessa. Don't look for more information on these timelines online or anywhere else. I discovered them in 2018, and they've not yet caught on. Or you can use astronomy software and a good image of Pillar 43 to discover them yourselves. Appendix 2 of my book, Clear Signs of Trouble and Great Joy, will show you how to do that. There will be a lot to discuss about these next 6 signs of witness. Subscribe to my channel so you will not miss that video, and like this video too, so others will come and see. But back to our present discussion. Christopher Columbus discovered America under this 21st sign. Ferdinand and Isabella also issued the Alhambra Decree that same year, expelling the Jews from Spain. They fled Spain to the Ottoman Turk Empire while Columbus was discovering America. Then The following year began a holy day tetrad to mark the particular significance of 1492. As the 22nd sign began intertwining with the 21st, the Ottoman Turks seized control of the land God promised to Abraham. That event of 1517 distinguished this empire as the seventh head of Revelation's symbolic seven-headed dragon, the head to be slain, which would rise again to become the infamous eighth empire, that of the tribulation's Antichrist. Psalm 23 praises the Good Shepherd, Jesus, for making us to lie down in green pastures and leading us beside still waters. The Bible prophesies Jesus' return to Jerusalem in the land God promised Abraham. Notice that the 19 and 48-year pattern of total lunar eclipses making this 23rd sign of witness began the very year after 1948, the year God restored Israel's nationhood in the land he promised to Abraham. Under this 23rd sign, in 1967, the young nation of Israel captured God's holy city, Old Jerusalem, from which Psalm 23's Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, will reign over 1,000 years of peace, making all the world to lie down in green pastures, leading us all beside still waters. Also under this sign, in 1968, Spain officially revoked the Alhambra Decree. We will return to this 23rd sign shortly. The 24th and 25th signs of witness are occurring in our skies even as you are watching this video. The 24th began in 1967, the year Israel captured Old Jerusalem. The 25th began in 1985, the first year of the great Ronald Reagan's second term as America's president. According to the signs in sun, moon, and stars Jesus said would precede his return, this 25th pattern will be ongoing at Jesus' second coming to defeat the Antichrist, end evil, and lead the remnant of mankind into peaceful pastures. The 26th sign of witness begins in 2072. Its last year draws to end the Sagittarius timeline of Göbekli Tepe's Pillar 43, Noah's monument to God's Ark. The last 6 signs of witness in NASA's lunar eclipse canon intertwine through the 200 years spanning the middle of Jesus' millennial reign of peace. This span of time from 2477 to 2677 stretches through the center of Pillar 43's Scorpio timeline. Recall that the 12 eclipses of each sign of witness are grouped into sixes, the first 6 occurring over 19 years, the second 6 over 48 years. Then notice that the final 12 signs of witness themselves are grouped into sixes by Pillar 43's 2 timelines. The first 6 prophesying our current events on the Sagittarius timeline, and the second 6 prophesying the middle of Christ's millennial reign on the Scorpio timeline. The biblical connections with these historic events: Israel, Israel's Messiah, Jesus Christ, Noah's prophetic Pillar 43, and those 32 signs of witness are unavoidable. Nature cannot coincidentally make this level of correspondence, nor did I imagine it. You can discover it for yourself using a history book and NASA's lunar eclipse canon. It is a real Morse code-like message from the greatest of all extraterrestrial intelligence, the Creator himself. In fact, the Creator has been signaling mankind from the very creation of the universe.
And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, and let them be for signs."
The last 12 of these 32 signs of witness corresponding seamlessly with Pillar 43's 2 prophetic timelines evidence the very ancient nature of his communication. Bringing religion into this question is appropriate, regardless of normal science's demand that no involvement of God shall explain any observable phenomena. With that attitude, if some unseen higher power really did make observable physical effects in our world, such as these patterns, then normal science would never know what their own scientific processes actually could discover about it. And so, neither would their trusting followers know. Choosing to deny without research the possibility of a higher power's involvement in our reality is a very risky course of action, especially if that involvement regards the delivery of rational and instructive messages. Normal science itself often proclaims the possibility of anything. So, by its own admission, it is possible that such involvement of a higher power in more of these patterns, also correlating with that nation's history, if such were found, might be to communicate a warning. My proposition of a higher power's involvement for sending a message is not very far out of line with other scientific hypotheses. For example, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is a decades-old mission to discover possible communications from space aliens made by orderly patterns within the universe's background radio noise. Another example is NASA's recent team commissioned to analyze unidentified anomalous phenomena, although its efforts are carefully limited to observations only of UFOs, so it will never have to identify this anomalous phenomena of orderly patterns made by total lunar eclipses correlating with meaningful history. The parallels are obvious, so the possibility is acceptable. Orderly patterns suggestive of a higher power's communication have been found in total lunar eclipses timed with the religiously relevant historical events of one particular nation throughout written history. Yet science keeps its eye peeled only on the universe's background radio noise, still searching for that first slightest pattern of radio waves suggesting the possibility of space aliens. It still sends probes to other planets looking for a water molecule by which to speculate the spontaneous generation of life out there, somewhere. And here, in our very own skies, there have now been found 32 highly correlative patterns of very probable communication normal science will refuse to acknowledge, even though they are definitely observable. Normal science stubbornly disbelieves what it refuses to research, while it faithfully believes in what its research has never found. Let us not be that unreasonable. Normal science has no integrity from which to measure the rationality of my proposition, and so neither do its consumers. But we will search wherever evidence has appeared, and we will go to wherever it leads. In fact, my proposition is the same as SETI's proposition. Do these observed patterns of eclipses timed with religiously relevant history of one particular nation suggest the capability of some higher power to fashion our reality into a communication? Do they confirm the existence of a particular higher power whom, if normal science had not been so biased in its research, everyone would know by now? Maybe normal science refuses to investigate them because it knows they might reveal the reality of the God whom normal science will not allow to be the explanation of any observed evidence. Science has always boasted about following all the evidence to wherever it leads. Yet normal science has never been willing to go wherever evidence has led to the Judeo-Christian Bible. If these highly correlative patterns are the Holy Bible's higher power, marking significant history for our somber attention, then normal science should be repentantly humbled into following to where they lead, and so should its consumers. Else, neither are being rational. For the sake of being honestly rational, Let's put away that scientific mistake of refusing to consider a higher power for explaining any phenomena, clearly calling for just that explanation. And let's certainly not go into our investigation with a grudging bias against the Holy Bible's God. Bias is a blindness to research and a deafness to observation. Let's be willing to acknowledge truly existent evidence, following it to wherever it leads. I was willing, so I searched with eyes wide open, and I identified 22 of these sequential patterns having actually occurred in the past. They were all identical to the pattern begun in the 20th century. 3 more were occurring even while I was searching for them in NASA's Eclipse canon. And 2 of those 3 are yet occurring even as you are watching this video. 7 more will occur in our future. Moreover, I discovered that every one of the past and present patterns happened during the occurrence of some key piece of history regarding always that same particular nation and its religious beliefs. And those 7 to occur in the future accord closely with that nation's most significant religious prophecies. Can chance make that happen? Recently, 2 Australian mathematicians, Stephen Woodcock and Jay Falletta, mathematically tested the old adage that a monkey with a typewriter could eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare, meaning that pure chance can produce unimaginably complex coincidences. Their peer-reviewed probability tests discovered that even the entire world population of chimpanzees, each having a typewriter, could nowhere near produce Shakespeare's collection, even if given the entire presumed life of the universe for doing it. So much for the old monkey with the typewriter theory, the theory that mere chance can produce any observed phenomena has now been proven wrong. Explanations of astronomically complex phenomena must now call on special design. And if a design, then a designer. For that reason, normal science kicks hard against the idea of special design. But again, normal science has not dealt rationally with all of the available evidence. All of those eclipse patterns during all of those particular religiously relevant events of the last 3,700 years distinguishes this physical situation as being more extraordinarily coincidental than what chance alone could possibly produce. Nature just does not make such enormous coincidences. No coincidence has ever been observed that has been even a tenth as complex and time-spanning as are these patterns happening in such close accord with one nation's history. They say the spontaneous occurrence of DNA and organic life is that coincidence, but those are far more complex than Shakespeare's anthology. Only monkeys would believe such complexities occurred by mere chance. But you might expect to find a few patterns among the several thousand total lunar eclipses of the NASA canon, the same way you can expect to occasionally see a face or some other familiar likeness in the clouds. But to properly compare this giant set of correlations between eclipse patterns and particular history to finding a face or two in the clouds, we would need to see Ringo Starr in one cloud, while Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and 3 guitars showed in a cloud to his right, with a cloud to his left forming Billy Preston and a keyboard. That would be so preposterous, the only way you would believe it would be to have seen it yourself. And even then, you might irrationally deny what your eyes actually did see. These 32 eclipse patterns happening over 3,700 years of one nation's religiously significant historical events is just that preposterous. Yet with a history book in one hand and the NASA lunar eclipse canon in the other, you actually can see this very same phenomena for yourself. I even challenge you to spend the time discovering it because it is real. This isn't just beetles in the sky with diamonds. It is the real occurrence of eclipse patterns meaningfully correlating with biblically relevant history, just like dots and dashes of Morse code once delivered messages. The eclipse patterns timing with significant events of one nation's long path of biblically prophesied history seems to fill them with ominous meaning. That nation's historical path is leading our world into a great religious conflict today. Therefore, could all of this be a straightforward warning? Would that be too incredible to believe? Ask SETI or search history. The plane strikes of September 11 seemed too incredible to believe as well. But there they were, a major historical event done by that same nation's arch enemy, Islam, unto that same nation's closest ally, America, occurring before everyone's eyes to see. To remain rational, we had to believe. And everyone knew it meant the world had changed that day. We eventually learned that those 4 plane strikes were purposefully designed by a deceitful, hostile people to deliver a message of war to a world already bemoaning its lost peace. And little did anyone know at the time, those plane strikes occurred under the most significant one of those 32 lunar eclipse patterns. Google Mecca crane collapse to see how vast the entire mystery of September 11 really is. For there, in Mecca, the events of September 11 got out of hand, at least out of human hands. 14 years after the Twin Towers fell to Osama bin Laden's successful plot, on September 11, 2015, the Grand Mosque in Mecca was crushed by the boom of a giant crane. Nearly 150 Islamic worshippers died, and a few hundred more were injured. It was the holy mosque of those who flew jets into the buildings of the ancient nation's closest ally on the same day of 14 years earlier. And stranger yet, the crane that toppled onto its roof was owned by the highly successful Saudi bin Laden group of construction companies. That company's spokesperson even called it an act of God. September 11's coincidences would seem quite preposterous if they were not well-known, undeniable history. They seem quite communicative by their correlation with that eclipse pattern begun in the 20th century. The pattern began the very year after that same ancient nation, Israel, regained its once lost nationhood in the very land its religious books, thousands of years earlier, said it would regain nationhood. At the end of that pattern of eclipses, Islam, which always fought hard against Israel's nationhood and worships under the roof of the Grand Mosque at Mecca, was crushed no less than by a bin Laden crane. 17 days after the boom was lowered onto the Grand Mosque, there began the last of 4 total lunar eclipses spaced 6 months apart, each one on a major holy day of Israel. Why had these 4 eclipses, one for each 9/11 jet strike, all occurred on the 2 most important holy days of America's ally, Israel? America and Israel are both arch enemies of those who worshipped at the Grand Mosque of Mecca. They called the one the great Satan and the other the little Satan. God's Bible calls one his saints and the other his elect. The depth of meaning in these correlations is obvious. Some coincidences make amazingly meaningful mysteries, but when their circumstances become too numerous and meaningfully interrelated for mere chance to explain, might they have become too complex to have occurred naturally? And should we then rethink our consideration of them as being mysteries? Is it possible they could have been designed and led forth by the God secular science has always sought to deny, impugn, and cast out of the public mind? Aren't possibilities to be disproved by objective research rather than by subjective proclamation? Maybe secular science is the real mystery. Maybe this ancient pattern of 12 total lunar eclipses, having begun with Israel's nationhood and having ended at the boom of a bin Laden crane, is a sign that Israel and America's God really did lower that boom onto the Mecca Mosque's roof, just as a Saudi bin Laden group spokesperson proposed it to have been an act of God. Nor is all of that the end of the September 11 coincidences. You can discover from our YouTube channel, Stephen Corey, and my book, Clear Signs of Trouble and Great Joy, that the years 2001 of the Twin Tower collapse and 2015 of the Mecca Mosque disaster were both Shemitah years.
What on earth is a Shemitah year?
It is a particular kind of Jewish religious year. Jewish, there it is again, another connection with the Judeo-Christian God and that little nation of ancient being. That boosts September 11's mystery even higher. 3,500 years ago, what has come to be the Holy Bible directed the Israelites to give their fields a hallowed rest every 7th year. And this amazing correlation between America, Israel, Islam, and that recurring pattern of total lunar eclipses involved two of Israel's special Shemitah religious years. Major interrelated historical events occurring in a sequential path of Shemitah years add even more to September 11's mystery. We will explore them all, as well as the message they imply, in a later video. But today, let's take a quick peek at just one. In New York City, where bin Laden felled the Twin Towers during a Shemitah year, on March 15 of the very next Shemitah year, 2008, the very Shemitah year before a wind shear toppled that bin Laden crane onto the Mecca Mosque's roof, another crane toppled out of a New York City construction project. Imagine that! 2 crane disasters occurring during 2 consecutive Shemitah years, one in the city of the jet strikes, the other in the city of those who flew the jets. And beyond that, the New York City crane collapse set the world record for crane disasters, which of course was broken 7 years later in Mecca during the very next Shemitah year. That New York City crane collapse killed 7 people, the same number as the years in every Shemitah cycle, the same number of years Hitler's Holocaust tortured Jewish people, the same number of years the book of Revelation's tribulation will haunt Jewish people, the same number of years spanned by America's 3 most recent total solar eclipses. 7 is one of the Bible's most significantly used numbers. Its biblical meaning is the complete spirituality of what it measures. The simplest concept of spirit and spiritual is essence, the underlying substance or form of a thing. Spirituality can entail the essence of deceit and demons, as well as it can entail the essence of truth and the Lord God. That's why you must be honestly discerning about spirituality. The 7 heads of Revelation's dragon and beast are demonic and deceitful in nature. The 7 world empires foreshadowing Revelation's 7-headed beast of the tribulation each sought full dominion over the world during 3,600 years of ruthless killing and terrorization. Each empire defeated the one before it like a 3,600-year chain of 7 writhing snakes. Every nation, politician, or neighbor struggling for power and control over other people and their possessions are all alike demonic deceivers. It is their essence. Deceit and destruction are their spirituality. That 7-headed dragon of Revelation expresses the spiritual deceiver of all mankind, and Revelation's 7-headed beast represents the world's nations, all led by deceit to control as many people as they can, taking from them as much wealth as they can. But those who work to preserve their fellow man's free will and enjoyment of his own possessions act from godly spirituality. Their essential nature concerns the well-being of everyone around them as much as it concerns their own. Therefore, godly nations, politicians, and neighbors work towards building one another up, seeking everyone's security, peace, and goodness of enjoying their own homes. 7 numbers both the heads of the book of Revelation's dragon as well as the light-giving torches surrounding God's throne. The number 7 speaks to the epitome of both a thing's essential nature relative to truth or deceit, as well as its ultimate rooting in either the Lord God or his nemesis, the deceiver. Notice also how 7 years take us from the beginning of Donald J. Trump's presidency in 2017 to his historic re-election in 2024, said to have been the most important election in American history, restraining America's collapse into the deceitful doom of every American forced out of wealth and home. We will explore America's 3 total solar eclipses of those 7 years in a later video. But for now, know that most of American history involved a governmental effort to maintain and protect the free will of its citizens, securing for them peaceful happiness within their own homes. Thank God that spiritual nature will continue in America for at least 4 more years. The year after Christopher Columbus first lit on America's shores in 1492, the same ensign arose that occurred the year after Israel became a nation in 1948. 4 total lunar eclipses 6 months apart on Israel's 2 most significant holy days. And above Christopher Columbus' arrival in America, during his entire adventure across the Atlantic, there winked and blinked the same 67-year pattern of 12 total lunar eclipses that began the year after Israel declared independence in the middle of the 20th century. Israel's new nationhood happened with the involvement of America's freedom-preserving Christian spirituality. Both America and Israel are targeted by the same hostile Islamic spirituality of lust for world dominion. Both nations are impugned by the worldwide web of liberals trying to spin history into sticky strands of deceit. And both had those 2 ensigns, 4 total lunar eclipses in a row, each one on a Jewish holy day, raised the year after their first day of historic recognition.
No man's hand was involved in that. No liberal spun it up. Nature does not make such meaning-filled correlations between celestial events and human history. It must have been the Holy Bible's God, for it could not have been anything else.
The spirituality of those 32 sequential patterns of eclipses should now be more apparent to you. Their correlations with biblically relevant historic events, meaningfully numbered spans of years, and especially those Shemitah years, proclaim the enormously spiritual essence of our current times. With that in mind, notice that the Saudi bin Laden group was formed in 1931. 1931 was another Shemitah year. 70 years before Osama bin Laden toppled the Twin Towers, the same number of years Judah spent in Babylonian captivity, the same number of years into the current era that Jerusalem was destroyed, the same number of 7-year spans in Daniel's prophecy leading through Revelation's tribulation to end evil. 70 is the biblical number of complete spirituality times the biblical number of perfect completion. 7 times 10. Yes, 10 Shemitah cycles. Meaning is delivered in orderly patterns. 12 is the biblical number meaning perfect order. The very way the Judeo-Christian Bible says God does everything perfectly, in good order, according to patterns that he determines. 12 Shemitah cycles after the bin Laden group was formed in 1931, God perhaps lowered the bin Laden crane boom onto the Mecca Mosque at the end of the 20th century's 67-year pattern made by 12 total lunar eclipses. The 12 total lunar eclipses, making those anciently recurring patterns, emphasize the orderly nature of their seemingly directed correlation with suspiciously spiritual events. I called them signs of witness because they suspiciously seem like God's signatures above biblically relevant history. The boom was lowered onto the Mecca Mosque only 14 days before the last 4 eclipses began the completion of that recurring 67-year pattern begun the year after Israel became a nation again. Does that not seem like a signature of God's witness? The pattern began at God's raising up Israel, and it ended with God lowering the boom onto the roof of Israel's arch enemy.
You can't make this stuff up, and that's just Steve's point. Neither can mere chance. Only a real, actually existing God can make perfectly ordered patterns between astronomical and historical events meaningfully correlating with each other.
Therefore, does the Israel from ancient times and its ancient holy days, its current ally America, and its abiding enemy Islam, all correlating with this particular one of 32 anciently recurring total lunar eclipse patterns, mean something very spiritual? Yes, it does. Watch this video to its end and see. Might all of this be solid scientific evidence of the creation of our material universe and mankind's history for an informative purpose by the very Creator described in the Judeo-Christian Bible? Thousands of years ago, Moses wrote in the beginning of the Holy Bible that the sun, moon, and stars were created by God to make signs, that is, informative patterns.
And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs."
Patterns form signs. Signs are evidence. And to be rationally honest, we must go to wherever evidence leads, even if it leads to the Lord God of the Holy Bible. In fact, that statement in the Holy Bible is a scientific hypothesis for scientific testing by simple observation. The Bible said they make signs. Do we see signs? NASA's very own lunar eclipse canon shows very real code-like patterns, that is, signs, made in the sequences of many total lunar eclipses, that is, lights in the firmament. You can confirm their existence yourself, which would be another scientific process. Appendices in my book, Clear Signs of Trouble and Great Joy, show you how to discover them. The science of simple observation has now tested the Holy Bible's thesis of signs to be true. You also must be scientific about it. Go see. Even though their basic unit of sequence is very simple, like bars of music, they are not at all coincidental. They are composed by the moon's clock-like orbit around Earth being tilted 5 degrees from Earth's consistent orbit around the sun. Those very orderly motions make eclipse patterns. But the timing of those patterns with biblically relevant history is far too orderly to be just coincidental. 16% of all the total lunar eclipses shown in NASA's canon form 142 identical units of this simple sequence. NASA calls them tetrads because their simple sequence is 4 total lunar eclipses timed 6 months apart. These 142 tetrads occur over a span of nearly 5,000 years. But 2/3 of all the tetrads form 32 more complex, yet still identical patterns, like bars of notes form lines of music. Are they all merely coincidental? Are they just clockwork? Could there possibly be a deliberate Morse code-like meaning for us today in these age-old patterns of total lunar eclipses? The Judeo-Christian Bible's creation story proclaims that God made the celestial lights for making signs. And behold, we are discussing signs made by the sun, moon, and stars, those very celestial lights the Bible said God made for signs, now showing that biblically given hypothesis to be true. These signs began in an era to which Hammurabi was recent history and Gilgamesh a popular legend, when Abraham's great-grandson Joseph was Pharaoh's right-hand man, and they continued stretching through all the empires foreshadowing Revelation's seven-headed beast from ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom to Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, the Macedonian and Roman empires, through the Ottoman Turk Empire, stretching right into our very own days before they come to their end 7 centuries beyond our current time. Like a timeless sonnet gathering meaning from the history it spans, does all of this without words sing an ancient tune about our nearing future? Yes, it does.
The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world.
The 23rd of those 32 more complex patterns should pick any rational person's mind, and not just because of most everyone's familiarity with the 23rd Psalm. It is the same pattern we have been discussing, the one having begun the year after Israel became a nation again, the one that led me to discover the other 31. And every adult is old enough to remember its occurrence, though few have ever heard of it. It spanned the 67 years beginning January 1, 1949 and ending December 31, 2015.
Yes, that same 2015 of the Mecca Mosque's September 11 disaster. Is Israel's beginning at the first of that sign, and the roof of its arch enemy crushed at the end of the same sign just a coincidence? I don't think so.
4 total lunar eclipses in a row, each one 6 months after the other, marked both the beginning and the end of this 67-year pattern. As I said a bit ago, NASA's eclipse canon shows 142 tetrads happening from 2000 BC through AD 3000. Tetrads are not uncommon, but this 1949 to 1950 tetrad was not just any old tetrad. The first of its total lunar eclipses occurred on April 13, 1949. That day happened to be Passover, the most important of Jewish holy days celebrated since the time of ancient Egypt and still celebrated today by that little nation come into existence again the very year before, Israel. Its second total lunar eclipse occurred 6 months later on the second most important Jewish holy day, Tabernacles, also celebrated by Israel since the time of ancient Egypt. 6 months later, on Passover 1950, the third eclipse occurred. Then the fourth happened 6 months after that on Tabernacles 1950. I call this special kind of tetrad a Holy Day tetrad because all of its eclipses very meaningfully occur on those 2 most important Jewish holy days. The tetrad, begun just after the Mecca Mosque collapse, was also a Holy Day tetrad. Might those 2 Jewish holy days interject even more spiritual meaning into this particular eclipse pattern than what I've already surmised? The Judeo-Christian God passes over humble, repentant, generous people to rid mankind's playing field of hostile, cheating, greedy people. He brought Israel out of Egypt that way, and he will clear the world of all trouble causers that way. Since we all cause at least a little trouble on a Passover day 2,000 years ago, he sacrificed himself to clear everyone of all the troubles they have ever caused who repentantly follow him into the same self-sacrifice for right living.
The righteousness of the righteous shall not deliver him when he transgresses, and as for the wickedness of the wicked, he shall not fall by it when he turns from his wickedness. And the righteous shall not be able to live by his righteousness when he sins. Though I say to the righteous that he shall surely live, yet if he trusts in his righteousness and commits iniquity, none of his righteous deeds shall be remembered, but in the iniquity that he has committed, he shall die. Again, though I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, yet if he turns from his sin and does what is lawful and right, if the wicked restores the pledge, gives back what he has taken by robbery, and walks in the statutes of life, committing no iniquity, he shall surely live, he shall not die. None of the sins that he has committed shall be remembered against him. He has done what is lawful and right. He shall surely live.
You cannot follow Jesus in spirit and sin in reality. He spiritually dwells in those who follow him in reality with a truly repentant soul, like he dwelt amongst the ancient Israelites when he led them out of Egypt. He promised to return from heaven to dwell physically with all mankind in Jerusalem for 1,000 peaceful years. The Jewish holy day Tabernacles celebrates God dwelling among his joyful people. These holy day tetrads correlate with both Israel and Jesus. The Judeo-Christian Bible says Jesus will return to dwell in Israel, passing over them to destroy their destroyers. Could that be what the perfect order of all the Passovers and Tabernacles of these holy day tetrads means us to read? Seeing the increasing relevance of the little nation of Israel to world history, even now drawing all of the nations towards the brink of another world war, maybe we should emphasize that the 67-year eclipse pattern we are discussing began in 1949, with that holy day tetrad raising the celebratory ensign at Israel's reestablishment. And let's definitely emphasize that the very next tetrad of lunar eclipses began in 1967, the same year Israel won control of Old Jerusalem, the city of the 23rd Psalm's shepherd, Jesus Christ. And of course, it also is a holy day tetrad. Only the very curious will notice that not only does the beginning of the 1949 to 1950 holy day tetrad to the end of the 2014 to 2015 one span 67 years, but the first 6 of its 3 holy day tetrads, 12 total lunar eclipses, occurred during the first 19 years of that 67-year span, and the last 6 occurred during its next 48 years. That is the anciently recurring pattern. 19 and 48 written across our skies, beginning the very year after 1948 began the new nation of Israel, the focal point of the biblical God's affairs with mankind's nations.
Thus says the Lord God, behold, I will take the people of Israel from the nations among which they have gone, and will gather them from all sides, and bring them to their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land, upon the mountains of Israel. One king shall be king over them all. He declares his word to Jacob, his statutes and ordinances to Israel. He has not dealt thus with any other nation. They do not know his ordinances.
See what I mean by coincidences too enormous to be explained by mere happenstance? See what I mean by considering the biblical God as an explanation of some plainly visible realities? In the Shemitah year 1882, God began gathering the scattered Israelites into the land he promised them. Then, in 1948, he made them into the nation of Israel, fulfilling major biblical prophecies. The only sign of witness made of 3 holy day tetrads began the very next year as God's own testimony to Israel's nationhood in the land he promised forever. That 23rd sign of witness evidences our need to pay Israel's reestablishment celebratory attention, for the magnificent heavens themselves pay it God's attention. This 23rd sign of witness spreads over the rejoining of God's holy city with Israel, the city from which the Judeo-Christian Bible says the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, the shepherd of his people, will reign for 1,000 years. Did nature just do that coincidentally? Preposterous! These 12 total lunar eclipses of those 3 holy day tetrads raised the ensign of testimony to very real 2,700-year-old biblical prophecies being fulfilled in our very own lifetime. What our own eyes have seen, our own minds have humbly acknowledged, so the truth has been verified. And just to bid farewell to any possibility of all this occurring merely by happenstance, let's emphasize that Israel took possession of Jerusalem in 1967. This sign of witness and all of the other 31 signs of witness span 67 years. And 67 just happens to be the 19th prime number. Therefore, each sign of witness not only encodes Israel's reestablishment in 1948, it also encodes Israel's reconnection with the Lord God's holy city in 1967. Throughout mankind's written history, all 32 signs of witness point to Israel becoming a nation again, with Jerusalem for its capital, from which Jesus Christ will reign when he returns. Only foolishness, total denial of evidence, sheer unwillingness to research and see, and yes, spiritual blindness can explain any refusal to acknowledge the Holy Bible's obvious connection to these eclipse patterns correlating with biblically relevant history. Scientists and preachers who refuse to consider the reality and meaning of those eclipse patterns have no excuse for ignoring these signals God has made. The human ability to decipher signals from space and recognize their meaning has now been tested and confirmed. In May 2023, a probe orbiting Mars was programmed to send a coded mock space alien radio transmission to Earth. Its purpose was to engage citizen scientists in a decoding project. 5,000 citizen scientists around the world worked 2 years on the signal's data before an American father-daughter team deciphered the encoded message. Among other organizations, SETI was in the middle of this made-up signal, having found no real signal of its own to decode.
We are discussing the real signal actually there to be found, but it's not a radio signal.
So I also spent 2 years deciphering the real signal. Let me make this one thing very clear. I did not make up these signals to decode, like SETI had to make up its signal to decode. Nor did I find those 4 sets of 4 eclipses on Jewish holy days that we've been discussing. Mark Biltz of El Shaddai Ministries found them being raised like ensigns at America's discovery, Israel's independence, Israel's repossession of Jerusalem, and the completion of that 1948 pattern. John Hagee wrote about them in his book, 4 Blood Moons, Something is About to Change. Jonathan Cahn introduced to us the 2001, 2008, and 2015 Shemitah years in his book, The Harbinger, the ancient mystery that holds the secret of America's future. Consult their work as well. But I discovered the other 31 signs of witness and the coming signs indicating the tribulation and Jesus' return. I also deciphered them. I even discovered the signs of the Mazzaroth shining the salvation message onto archaeology's most mysterious pillar. I wrote of these in my book, Clear Signs of Trouble and Great Joy. I've uploaded videos about them to our YouTube channel, Stephen Corey. Even though I found similar spans of tetrads encoding other years as well, for instance, 1954, 1957, 1917, and even 1517, this 1948 pattern is the only one which began the very year after the year its pattern expressed, 1948, the year when deeply fundamental biblical prophecy was fulfilled by Israel's reestablishment as a nation. And every one of those 32, 19, and 48 signs of witness happened while biblically significant events were occurring, events strung throughout recorded history with these signs of witness shining above like a string of Christmas lights.
They are real phenomena. Should they be ignored as mere anomalies? At what point of very meaningful complexity should coincidence be dismissed and investigation be engaged?
I asked that question of normal scientists and preachers alike, most of whom would rather ignore than explore this awesomely mysterious phenomena. The Holy Bible itself states that the sun, moon, and stars were positioned for making these code-like patterns, and that such patterns would indicate the nearing approach of the Bible's main prophetic event, the return of Jesus Christ.
And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth distress of all nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory.
Only a God in perfect control of all our existence could make these meaningful patterns. Only such a God as described in the Bible would make those patterns to meaningfully correlate with Christian America, Jewish Israel, God's holy city, Jerusalem, Jesus Christ, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, as well as their arch nemesis, Islam. The existence of these patterns is clearly for communication. The Bible tells us that God spoke to our ancestors also in ways other than words.
In many and various ways, God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets.
Long ago, he spoke in religious symbols to our ancestors through his prophet Enoch, because they thought in symbolic terms, having few words. Göbekli Tepe monumentalizes in symbolic terms what God told them through Enoch. Watch our previous videos on Göbekli Tepe and see. Centuries later, he spoke to our ancestors in religious terms through his prophets to Israel. They wrote what he said in plain language. We can still read what they wrote in the Holy Bible. And today, we find God using scientific terms for speaking to a scientifically minded world. He is giving us clear evidence written in the sun, moon, and stars correlating with biblically significant history throughout time. The God described in the Holy Bible is a rational, highly communicative God. He is real. Why would he not communicate rationally with us today, using terms verifiable by our own scientific processes, the very idol mankind created to replace his Bible? He is not only rational, his ways are full of meaning. Our entire series of videos aims to show you the rationality of God, warning this very generation of people to pay attention to his works. For the Bible says his next work will be his passing over his believers in order to end his deniers and dwell with the remnant of mankind. The Bible calls it the tribulation because it brings tremendous disaster and trouble onto earth before he brings mankind's rebellious denial of him to an abrupt end. Jesus told us that this disastrous tribulation will strike the people of evil's end like the great flood struck the people of Noah's day.
As were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man.
Noah and his granddad went throughout the world preaching of an impending doom to come in a great flood. Nobody paid attention. Instead, everyone ate richly and drank happily, arranging their affairs for a long life, marrying and giving in marriage. Today, very real signs in sun, moon, and stars are clearly proclaiming the return of Jesus Christ, long thought by most of our generation to be only a myth. So, most people today are paying no attention, partying heartily with food and drink, ordering their lives for longevity, marrying whatever they choose to marry, not knowing their denial of God and his Christ is unsustainable in the face of his return. And, not at all coincidentally, in the very days of this science-worshipping generation of evil's end, science discovered archaeology's most mysterious pillar. Upon it is the very clear symbolic depiction of Noah's great flood, as if God himself has delivered Noah's warning of impending doom to this generation of today. Even while God's 23rd sign of witness confirmed his preparation to cleanse earth of all evildoers, history guided by God's hand brought to us the deciphering of Pillar 43's symbolic warning. These realities are too enormous to be coincidental, and we're just beginning to explore them. Stay with us through this entire series of videos, for they will show you the most astonishing celestial phenomena seen by man, the signs the real and living holy God wrote in the sky for mankind to read. God bless you until next time. And if you do not yet know God personally, abandon this world's imaginary beliefs to believe the reality of God's Son, Jesus Christ, and do what he tells everyone to do in order to know his Father. Call on him, turning away from mankind's make-believe to follow what his Bible teaches, and love doing what is right. Do this now, for time is of the essence. The two of you will get along greatly. That is his purpose for everyone who wants to believe and follow what his Bible teaches us, and his stars are now found to be confirming.
You who do know the Father through his Son, rationally consider what God's Word says about signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Pay attention to them. Think about the billions of people who need to know your Father before it is too late. Think about those who might come to him having seen their own physical universe confirm his holy word. Get to know these signs. Get involved with Noah's effort to warn. Go talk about what they say about Jesus Christ's return. Make the signs of God's witness well known. You know he's coming. You know he said signs would precede his coming. Therefore, go help the people around you meet him with great joy.